Rosa Delgado hadn't smiled in 3 years, not since they buried Miguel under the cottonwood behind the chapel. Now she stood behind the scarred oak bar of the Silver Star Saloon, watching another man with money and empty promises walk through her door. Silas Crane, land baron, 6 ranches to his name and hungry for a 7th. He crossed the floor like he already owned it, boots clicking on warped pine, silver spurs catching lamplight. The other patrons went quiet. Even drunk cowboys knew when to keep their heads down. Mrs. Delgado. He removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked hair slicked back with pomade. A word in private? Say what you came to say. Rosa's hand stayed near the shotgun under the bar, fingers resting on cool metal. Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm prepared to offer $1,500 for your establishment and the acre it sits on. That's generous, considering your situation. Her jaw clenched. My situation? A woman alone. He spread his hands like he was being reasonable. Running a saloon draws the wrong attention. Men get ideas. Without a husband's protection. I didn't survive 3 years of drought, locusts, and cattle thieves to hand over my property because some men can't control themselves. The words came out sharp as broken glass. Crane's expression hardened. I'm trying to help you, Rosa. By stealing what's mine? Miguel built this place with his own hands before. She stopped. Some wounds stayed fresh no matter how much time passed. Before the Apaches killed him, Crane leaned on the bar, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixing with whiskey breath. Which is ironic, considering who you've got working your horses. Rosa's spine stiffened. Through the window, she could see Eli Crow in the corral, breaking a wild Mustang with patience most men didn't possess. His movements were fluid, economical, like water finding its path. Eli's the best foreman in the territory. He's Apache. Crane said it like that settled everything. Half. The correction came automatically. And he's never given me a moment's trouble. Yet. Crane straightened, replacing his hat. Think about my offer. A woman in your position shouldn't be so quick to refuse friendship. The threat hung in the air thick as gun smoke after he left. Rosa found Eli an hour later, mending fence posts near the creek. Sweat darkened his shirt between his shoulder blades despite the evening cool. He didn't look up when she approached, just kept driving nails with rhythmic precision. Crane came by. She crossed her arms, suddenly aware of how isolated they were out here. How isolated she'd been since Miguel died. Eli's hammer paused mid-swing. What did he want? What they all want. My land, my business, my compliance. She kicked at a rock, watched it tumble into the water. He made it sound like protection. Protection from what? Now he did look at her, dark eyes unreadable under the brim of his hat. From being a woman alone, apparently. The bitterness surprised even her. Like I haven't been managing just fine. Eli set down the hammer, wiped his hands on his jeans. You hired me 6 months ago because rustlers were stealing your horses twice a week. Because drunk cowboys were starting fights in your saloon. Because the bank sent men to discuss your late mortgage payments. Rosa felt heat rise in her cheeks. And you've earned every dollar I've paid you. I'm saying you're not as alone as you think. He picked up a new fence post, positioned it with careful attention. And Crane knows that. Meaning he'll try to change that. Eli drove the post into the ground with 3 sharp strikes. Men like him don't take no for an answer. They just find new ways to ask. 3 nights later, fire lit up the sky. Rosa bolted awake to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses screaming. She grabbed the shotgun and ran outside in her nightdress, bare feet hitting cold dirt. The barn was an inferno. Orange flames clawed at the darkness, eating through wood and hay with hungry efficiency. The horses were trapped inside, terror making them crash against stall doors. Then she saw him. Eli was already at the barn entrance, shirt wrapped around his face, kicking at the burning door. Sparks showered his shoulders as timber cracked and groaned overhead. Get back, Rosa shouted, but he'd already disappeared into the smoke. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The heat pushed her back even from 20 feet away. She thought about Miguel, about the way violence had stolen him before she could say goodbye. Now she was going to watch another good man die, trying to save what was hers. The first horse burst through the flames, eyes rolling white. Eli's hand twisted in its mane. Then another, and another. He made 4 trips into that hell before the roof collapsed, each time emerging with soot-streaked skin and another terrified animal. When the last horse was free, Eli dropped to his knees in the dirt, coughing so hard Rosa thought his lungs might tear. She fell beside him, hands hovering over his shoulders, afraid to touch in case he was burned. You could have died. Her voice cracked. He looked at her through the smoke and chaos, chest heaving. So could they. By morning, the barn was ash and blackened timber. The marshal came out from town, examined the scene with the enthusiasm of a man who already knew what he'd find. Lamp oil. He kicked at debris, revealing glass fragments. Someone wanted this to burn hot and fast. Who? Rosa demanded, though she already knew. The marshal scratched his jaw, uncomfortable. Now, Mrs. Delgado, throwing accusations around without proof. Crane threatened me 3 days ago. She pointed at what remained of her livelihood. Said I shouldn't refuse his friendship. This seemed friendly to you. I'll talk to him. The marshal's tone said he wouldn't do anything of the sort. In the meantime, might want to reconsider that offer. Man who'd burn a barn might do worse next time. He left her standing in the ruins of her hard work, and the rage that filled her chest felt like its own kind of fire. Eli appeared beside her, one arm wrapped in bandages, face cleaned but still showing red burns along his jaw. He'd refused to see the doctor until every horse was checked and settled in the emergency corral. You should have let me shoot Crane when he walked in. Rosa wasn't joking. Would have felt good for about 5 minutes. Eli studied the wreckage. Then the law would hang you, and he'd buy this place from the state for pennies. She hated that he was right. So what do I do? Rebuild. He said it like it was simple. Show him you can't be burned out. With what money? The horses are traumatized. The barn's gone. Even if I had the funds, she stopped, feeling tears prick her eyes for the first time since Miguel's funeral. I'm tired, Eli. So damn tired of fighting. He turned to face her fully, and she saw something shift in his expression. Something that had been carefully hidden until now. Then let me fight for you. The words hung between them, meaning more than just physical protection. Rosa felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Why? She whispered. Why do you care what happens to me? Eli was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough as gravel. Because you didn't flinch when I told you I was Apache. Because you pay fair wages when half the ranchers in the territory work their hands like slaves. Because you've got fire in you that reminds me why some things are worth protecting. He looked away, jaw tight. And because watching you stand alone makes my chest hurt in a way I don't have words for. Rosa's breath caught. She thought about all the men who'd proposed marriage in the last 3 years. Men with land and cattle and proper pedigrees. Men who saw her as property to acquire. A woman who needed managing. Eli had never asked her for anything except honest work and fair treatment. Crane won't stop, she said finally. I know. He might send worse than fire next time. I know that too. Eli met her eyes again, and she saw steel beneath the patience. But I'm Apache. We're real good at making people regret underestimating us. Crane's men came a week later. 5 of them, hired guns with dead eyes and loose holsters. They rode up to the saloon mid-afternoon when business was slow, clearly expecting to intimidate a woman with no options. They found Eli instead. He stood in the doorway, rifle cradled casually in his arms, face expressionless. Rosa watched from behind him, shotgun loaded but hidden from view. We got business with Mrs. Delgado. The lead rider, a scarred man with tobacco-stained teeth, spat in the dirt. You can move along, Injun. Mrs. Delgado's business is my business. Eli didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his stance. State it or ride out. The gunman's hand drifted toward his revolver. Mr. Crane's given his final offer. $1,000 and she leaves tomorrow. Otherwise what? Eli's tone stayed level, but Rosa saw the way his finger moved near the trigger. You'll burn another barn? Threaten a woman? 5 armed men against 1 widow. That make you feel strong. Makes me employed. The gunman grinned, showing brown teeth. And you're outgunned, breed. Maybe. Eli tilted his head slightly. But I only need to shoot one of you before Mrs. Delgado drops 2 more with that shotgun she's holding. Quick math says 3 of you ride away alive. And I'm betting none of you know which 3. The silence that followed felt like drawn steel. Rosa's hands were slick on the shotgun. Her heart pounded so hard she thought they'd hear it. These men killed for money, and Eli was gambling everything on the hope they loved their lives more than their pay. The lead gunman's eyes flicked between Eli and the darkened doorway where Rosa waited. She stepped forward just enough to let sunlight catch the barrel of her weapon. Crane's not paying enough for this, one of the other riders muttered. The scarred man's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Finally, he reined his horse back. Tell Crane to double my rate if he wants us to come back. They rode off trailing dust and muttered curses. Rosa's legs nearly gave out. She stumbled against the doorframe, and Eli's hand steadied her elbow, warm and solid. You're shaking. His voice was soft now, concerned. I thought she couldn't finish. Thought she'd watch him die. Thought she'd lose another person she cared about to senseless violence. I know. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist. Just once, barely contact at all. But I'm still here. She looked up at him. This quiet man who'd faced down 5 killers without flinching, who'd run into a burning barn for horses that weren't even his, who'd stayed when every reasonable person would have fled. Why? The question came out broken. Why risk your life for me? Eli's expression softened in a way she'd never seen. Rosa, I'd walk through fire for you. He paused, then added with the ghost of a smile. Already did once. Seemed rude not to make it a habit. Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the weight of 3 years alone, she laughed. It surprised them both. Crane himself arrived the next morning, alone this time, face dark as a thunderhead. Your Indian scared off 5 good men. He stood in the saloon's entrance, not bothering with pleasantries. You think that makes you safe? I think it makes me expensive. Rosa kept the bar between them. How many men are you willing to lose? How much money before you realize I'm not for sale? This isn't about money anymore. Crane stepped closer, and something in his eyes made Rosa's stomach clench. This is about respect. A woman doesn't tell me no. A half-breed doesn't threaten my employees. You've embarrassed me, Rosa, and that has consequences. Get out of my saloon. I'll bury you. He said it casual as discussing weather. You, your horses, your Apache guard dog. This town will forget you ever existed. No. Both of them turned. Eli stood in the back doorway, rifle in hand. But that's not what made Crane go pale. Behind him, arrayed in the morning sun, were a dozen Apache warriors on horseback. Silent. Armed. Waiting. My cousin received word about barn burnings and hired guns. Eli's voice carried quiet authority. Said it sounded like the old days when white men thought they could take whatever they wanted from Apache land. Crane's hand trembled near his revolver, but even he wasn't foolish enough to draw. He asked if I needed help. Eli continued. I said maybe just a show of support. Let certain people know that threatening someone under my protection means threatening my family. One of the warriors, an older man with silver braids, spoke in Apache. Eli nodded, then translated. My uncle says you have until sunset to sign papers transferring your land claims to Mrs. Delgado. Fair market price. Otherwise, he smiled without humor. Otherwise, he'll assume you're declaring war on the Apache nation, and we both know how that ended last time. Crane's face went from white to purple. You can't, the army. The army's busy with the Sioux up north. The older warrior spoke in heavily accented English. And last I checked, burning barns and sending killers after widows isn't exactly legal either. So maybe we all keep quiet, yes? Crane stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. This isn't over. It is. Rosa found her voice, found the steel that had kept her alive these 3 years. You'll sign those papers, Silas. And then you'll stay off my land, out of my business, and away from my people. Because if you don't, she looked at Eli, at the warriors behind him, at the life she'd fought so hard to keep. I won't stop him next time. Crane signed the papers that afternoon. 2,000 acres transferred to Rosa's name, including water rights that tripled her property's value. The marshal witnessed it with tight lips and suspicious eyes, but even he couldn't argue with legal documents. By evening, the warriors had ridden out with promises to visit again soon. The saloon filled with curious patrons who'd seen the Apache escort and wanted the full story. Rosa poured drinks with steady hands while Eli watched from his usual corner, face unreadable. When the last customer stumbled home near midnight, she locked the door and finally let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. She found Eli checking the horses one final time, the new barn half-built in skeletal frames against the stars. He looked up when she approached, and something in his expression made her brave. I made a vow after Miguel died. The words came hard. Said I'd die before I married again. Before I let another man own me, control me, make decisions about my life. Eli nodded slowly. I remember. You said it loud enough that half the territory heard. I meant it. She moved closer, close enough to see the burns healing on his jaw, the worry lines around his eyes that came from caring too much. But you've never tried to own me. Never asked for anything except the right to stand beside me. Rosa, let me finish. Her voice shook but held. You walked into fire for my horses. Faced down killers for my business. Brought your family to protect my land. And you never once asked for payment beyond honest wages. She reached up, fingers trembling as they touched his face. That's not a foreman, Eli. That's a man who loves you. He said it quiet but certain, like admitting something he'd known for months. Who'd do it all again tomorrow if it meant you gotta keep being exactly who you are. Rosa felt tears slip free, hot against her cheeks. I vowed I'd die before I married again. I know. Eli caught her hand, pressed it against his chest where his heart hammered. So don't marry me. Just let me stay. Let me keep standing beside you, protecting what's yours, being someone you can trust. You don't want. She couldn't finish, couldn't ask if he'd settle for being less than a husband. I want you safe. His other hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away tears. I want you happy. I want to wake up every morning and see you fighting to keep this life you've built. Everything else, titles, papers, vows, that's just details. She kissed him then, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. He tasted like smoke and honesty, and when his arms wrapped around her, she felt something she'd thought Miguel's death had stolen forever. Safe. Protected. Seen. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the darkness of the half-built barn. "I'm not ready," Rosa whispered. "For marriage, for vows, for promises about forever. I know, but I'm ready for this." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "For you. For letting someone stand beside me instead of behind me or in front of me." Eli smiled, real and warm and rare as desert rain. "Then that's what we'll be. Partners. Partners." She tested the word, found it fit better than wife ever had. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Would you have really brought your family to war for me?" He was quiet for a moment, then, "Rosa, I'd have brought them to war, hell, and back again. You saved my life once by giving me honest work when every other rancher slammed doors in my face. Figured it was past time I returned the favor." She remembered now, 6 months ago, a quiet man with Apache blood and no references asking for a chance. She'd hired him because he'd looked her in the eye and promised good work, and because she'd been desperate enough to gamble on honesty. "We saved each other then." She laced her fingers through his. "Yeah." Eli pulled her close again, and they stood there in the skeleton of the new barn while stars wheeled overhead. "Guess we make a good team." 2 years later, Rosa Delgado still owned the Silver Star Saloon, still ran it with iron will and careful books, still refused every marriage proposal that came her way. But the ranch foreman who lived in the house she'd built beside her own, the Apache man who broke horses and mended fences and stood quiet guard over everything she'd fought to keep, everyone in the territory knew he was more than hired help. Knew that the widow who'd vowed to die before remarrying had found something better than a husband. She'd found an equal. And on summer evenings, if you passed by the Silver Star near sunset, you might see them on the porch. Rosa counting receipts while Eli carved new fence posts. Working side by side in comfortable silence, the kind that came from trust earned through fire and threats, and choosing each other every single day. Not marriage. Something better. Partnership built on respect, defense forged in flame, and love that didn't need vows to prove it was real.